I've got 6:32, so I will go ahead and get started. Let's open with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Lord, through all of our challenges, joys, struggles, fears, and celebrations, you have given us a soul, a body, a mind, a spirit, gifts, talents, our very presence to share and to give with one another, that we may share the gift of life, the gift of your love and grace. Grant, as we meditate on these words of Henri Nouwen, that we may always remember what it is to be given much, so that we can always remember that we are called to give ourselves to one another in joy and faithfulness always. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, just want to say one quick part to close out the broken chapter here. Don't have my physical book, but I've got my ebook here tonight, so I'm going all high tech on all sorts of fronts here. On the broken chapter, there is a part at the very end, as I scroll very feverishly to get back to it here. I lost my mark on my phone here. There is a part that says about brokenness that it's actually the very last paragraph, which is page 91 in my version. It says, "As I grow older, I am more than ever aware of how little as well as how much we can do for others." And that's his concluding statement about our brokenness. As much as we talked about how we all experience brokenness, how our brokenness is something that's painful, we don't want to face, yet our brokenness is also something that, as we recognize what little we have the power to do, that there is power in trusting in God to turn that brokenness into something much more, which I think is a great segue into our chapter on being what it is to be given. And of course, he starts off in that chapter by talking about the fact that one of the things about being given is not just about giving something to another person, but giving ourselves. And he makes a statement that's sort of, I guess, an implicit bias within there, and I'm kind of where I want to start tonight. His implicit bias is that we as human beings are by nature creatures who are inclined to give, and yet somehow we have forgotten how to do that. He says that explicitly a couple of places, but it's really more of an implicit statement that sort of undergirds his entire chapter. Do you agree with that statement? That it's kind of two parts. Are we naturally inclined to give? And if so, have we forgotten how to do it as human beings or the human race? What do you think? Big question to start us off with.
Well, I think that we're always giving, and whether realize that we see someone or come in contact with someone, just our facial expression and attitude is something that is given to that other person. So in a sense, it could be a good gift, like a smile or a hello or a welcome, or it could be something less than that, which might demean the other person or shows a lack of respect to the other person. So that's my sense.
I think that's a good point, that we can give. Hey, Deb, welcome to the party. Good to see you.
I may have to leave if Roger comes home because we're having his birthday party when he returns.
What? I mean, geez, you mean
Yeah.
you're going to leave us for his birthday? Heaven forbid.
He's been gone for a few days, so.
Good. Jim was just making a great point. I'd asked the question, Deb, about are we naturally inclined to give, and if so, have we forgotten how to do it? And you make a good statement, Jim. I think we forget that giving can be good and it can be bad. I think that's a very important thing to realize. Let me hear some further thoughts on it if anybody has anything, because I'd like to expand on that for a minute. Any other thoughts? Jim, I see giving in the form of my son, and children I think are a great testimony to this. I was just having this conversation the other day with a friend of ours who has a child about James Henry's age, who basically said children are the bearers of gifts of all kinds and sizes, and they make no bones about it. My son has a tendency to wear his emotions on his sleeve very well. The facial expression he will give you indicates very quickly what he wants to give you, whether it is a piece of his mind because mom and daddy have said no, or whether he just wants to give a big hug. He gives random gifts all the time. He's a little boy, so I won't go into detail, but those of you who've been around little boys know what kind of other gifts they like to share, kind of, 4-year-old boy humor. He loves to share those things too. But I think it's a lesson for us to remember as adults. And it's something you said, and I can't quote it exactly, but the fact that when we see each other, our facial expressions, the way we greet each other, the way we treat each other, what we might not do for each other in certain circumstances is an act of giving in that regard. And with that, he starts this chapter within, talking about this bias of we're naturally inclined to give. Ultimate gift we can give is ourselves, which seems like a generic and sort of blah statement, but he does go on to explain that. And he says that the gift of giving oneself, and I'm going to be jumping around the chapter a little bit. I'm just kind of picking up on the cogent points that really spoke to me. The gift of giving oneself is not that we are people necessarily who have a lot of talents, but rather we are people who have a lot of gifts to share. You remember when he said that?
Yes.
What's the difference in that? What's the difference as he defines it, and as well as what you may understand it, between gifts and talents? Because that's a very churchy term we use all the time, gifts and talents.
Talents to me, it means something that is unique to that person, but we all have gifts. We can do the gift of friendship. We can do the gift of sharing, the gift of being present, as opposed to, I can't paint a picture.
Yeah.
Well, I can, but it's not going to be very pretty.
You can't. Yeah, that's right. You can. It just may be not something anybody but you might appreciate. So.
I think, too, that a talent is something you develop. How many times have you heard the best musicians and artists, it's 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration?
Yeah.
And a gift is something that's just there. I've been in situations where I'm just talking with someone and we'll have, and at the end of the conversation, they say, "Thank you, you told me exactly what I need to hear." And I go,
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I had
no planning on that.
I was just all I was doing was paying attention.
Yeah. But, and that's a great example right there of, and I kind of responding to Jim was that sometimes what we don't offer, sometimes we're so busy that we don't offer. When somebody wants to talk to us, it seems sometimes almost an exception, more than a rule, where somebody actually deeply pays attention to what we're saying. And just like you said, Victoria, the fact that you were actually just present with somebody when they just needed to talk meant the world to them. And like, okay, you're welcome. I didn't really know that was something that I was offering.
Well, that sort of brings up another point that I'm a little reluctant to raise because it's easy to go skating off the tracks here.
That's all right. We do that frequently.
But presence and community, what we have lost is a sense of commons. And in order to be truly present with someone, you have to assume that there is a common somewhere. There's something you hold in common. Even if it's as basic as your humanity and your need for air and water. And we as a culture have privatized things like water and been cavalier with our treatment of land and air. And I think that makes everyone defensive over time.
Yeah, basic professions, you know, and kind of in that theme. I heard this said by somebody the other day, and I'm sure all of you have heard it said in some way. My time is being wasted. Somebody out in public was waiting in line, of course, that I was annoyed with because they were standing behind me in a line, less than a foot away from me without a mask. So I was already annoyed with them and then their attitude. But that comment struck me, and it really resonates now that you say that about talking about things like water and land, because my time, well, we share time together. Yes, we do different things with our time, but we do share time together. We occupy this time together. And there was a class I took in seminary, which essentially was, the title of it was very boring. It was Chronos versus Kairos time. And that's not really something that would attract you to the class, but it was fascinating because it talked about first the difference between what we perceive as time, which is Chronos time, versus God's time, Kairos time, and the fact that part of living in God's time is understanding the fact that we share time together, not just with those we live with now, but through the saints scattered throughout all generations, both before and after. And, thinking about taking care of the creation for those who come after us as a gift, taking care of the gifts that were passed down to us by our ancestors. It was one of the things talking about sharing of time, how many things we share in that concept of time as such. So I think what you say, Victoria, is a great point about that. And indeed, we have now skated off the track. I lost track of where I was going with my initial point, but I think the idea, going back to gifts and talents, to use his terminology from earlier chapters, a talent is often something that we are defined by other people. Oh, he is so good, or she is so good at baking or woodworking or running or an athlete, the talents that we're defined by. And we often, in our minds, I know I do this a lot, I define myself a lot by what I cannot do. Michael, I know we're broadcasting, I'm not going to say his last name. There's a member of our church, most of you know him, who's an outstanding woodworker. And every time I see what he does, I'm sitting there going, I want that talent so bad. And I become jealous and envious and somewhat feel ashamed that I don't have that kind of talent. Do any of you do that by any chance? Look at somebody who just has this amazing talent in something and say, man, just feel like I'm totally a worthless human being because I can't even compete with this person. Anybody else do that, by the way?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yes,
Then I realize I'm not willing to put in the work.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Like you
I
said,
I've had a problem with music.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to work that hard, and I started too late.
Yeah, talent, I think, what you did definition is something you work on. Whereas a gift, in that sense, like both you, Victoria, and Judith were talking about, a gift is something where you do have to make effort to do it. And you have to be very conscious about doing it. But it's something that we all have. You can always welcome someone, but you have to make the effort to do it. You can always be encouraging to someone, but you have to make the effort to do it. You can always listen to someone, but you have to make the effort to do it. And listening, go back to that Corey was mentioning, listening is something which is challenging because there's so many different things going on. I'm sure all of you are like me. You choose not to, you would choose not to do it if you had the choice, but oftentimes we don't have the choice but to try to multitask. There's too many things going on at once, and you have competing interests to listen. And essentially, you have to make the choice of what am I going to put down so I can give my full attention to something that truly needs me to listen. But we all can do it. It's a matter of making it a priority for who and what we are listening to. Any other thoughts about that before I get too far off track again? Bird has plenty to say. Whoever's got the bird in the background, I like hearing that. So it's a very, very comforting thing to hear.
They're outside. Those
Yeah.
aren't my birds. Those are the real birds.
Those are the real ones.
Your birds
Yep.
are real birds.
I
They're real cockatiels.
like them.
Spoiled rotten.
Here's a statement, again, kind of along these lines. Kind of speaks to our human nature. Again, goes back to the question I started this with. It's a statement he writes on, it's either 94, 95. Our greatest fulfillment lies in giving ourselves to others. What would you say about that? Is that something true for you, or struggle with that? Let me answer, maybe generate a little further conversation. I agree with it to a point, because sometimes when you give yourselves to others and those others stomp on you and take advantage of your vulnerability, it becomes not a fulfillment but a deep burden to give yourself to others. I have experienced many times in life, no good deed goes unpunished. I'm sure you have heard that expression. You probably have lived that expression. But the times where giving of myself to someone, and I don't give myself for the reward necessarily. I'd be lying if I said that. There's times where I don't say, well, you should tit for tat here. But there's a lot of times where I just say, it's just, I will do something or give myself for someone, and I don't expect anything back. And when somebody does return a favor or returns kindness to me, it almost is shocking to me, because it's not what I expect. And in that sense, it's reminds me of the connectedness we have with each other. What about you? Any further thoughts about that?
I struggle with that. Everyone's read The Giving Tree. Everyone know about the Shel Silverstein? Okay. Well, I read The Giving Tree because I like Shel Silverstein. And by the end of it, I was ready to scream. I think it's a terrible book, and I refuse to read it to my child because there's giving, there's sacrificial giving, and then there's a complete disregard for your own boundaries, which is suicidal giving. And I think it's important to learn the difference. And within that context, if your own boundaries are secure, then the statement is fine. But anyway, it's The Giving Tree all over again.
I think it's sad that a lot of people always assume there's an angle to that, like, what do you want back?
Yeah.
And the whole idea of giving without expectation of some kind of return, that's very hard to do. I mean, our culture is just not geared for that. Does that make any sense?
No, it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, more though, our culture's not angled to that. I think we all implicitly understand that, but if you were to articulate that, what do you mean?
If we're going somewhere and there's a panhandler on the side on the side of the road, and I go up and give the guy something, and then the people with me are like, oh, don't, you're just, I guess I lost my train of thought.
Are you trying to say, if you see somebody,
it's better to give, even if you, to sometimes give of yourself, even if that's not going to be appreciated, because the act of giving of yourself is.
Yeah.
I have some friends that don't understand why I would do that. I go out of my way to give that person, the $5 or whatever it is for their meal. And then people go, oh, don't do that or whatever. You're just encouraging it or something. And, I guess it's just, anyway. Sorry, I'm not as incoherent mode this evening. I apologize.
You're planning a birthday party, so you got plenty on your mind. But no,
Well, we've had a lot going on this week.
if I can cut just from what you're saying, this may not be exactly what you're saying, but kind of along that angle. Many times, and I've been guilty of this myself in past years, and certainly even today, I still maybe think it in my mind. You give money to somebody, and you first think, well, don't you go buy booze with it, or don't you go do such and such. You offer control over what it is that you're giving. You're giving the money, but there's an expectation and a screen and an agenda attached to the giving of that money. And one of the things that Victoria, your point about the giving tree, there are times if somebody corners me in an alley, which has happened before, and asks for money, I'm probably not going to give it just because it's not asked in a way, it's asked in a way that makes me feel threatened for my life. And there are times where somebody's asked for something, I'll walk them and I'll buy them a sandwich, and partly because I'm like, I don't know about giving you money, but I will buy you a sandwich, and that's what I can do. There's other times where I would just give money, and even if I may have some reservations in my head, I give it, and it's up to them to take it. There's no expectation. I just give it. And I think you can take money out of the equation and say the same thing, that, you can give of your time to someone. Well, they didn't appreciate that I was over at their house helping them move for 6 hours. Is that what it?
I think that's a bit what I'm getting at. It's more like people that do something for you and then they expect something in certain attitude or certain response in return. It's like, okay, and I'm not coherent today. I apologize.
That's okay. No,
I'm sorry I missed, because this is a wonderful book and I really got quite involved with it, and then I've missed every session and I finally get to a discussion and I'm incoherent.
You're fine. We take all statements and comments. So, and no, it's not incoherent. I can tell you that. I just asked you to expand on that only because you said it's a cultural thing, and I agree with you. I think there is in our culture, it's an exchange type. Giving is an exchange. And that's just the way it is, for good and for bad. It's not necessarily all bad. It's not all good, but that's sort of the mentality of giving, is an exchange. What is different then? How can we work on being the type of givers that Nouwen is talking about? What it comes down to. How do we do that? Just giving ourselves without regard for any expectation of return. I kind of answer my own question back to Victoria, what you're saying about talents. I think we have to work at it. Sometimes when I do my prayers, when I do my meditation every day, when I do my studies of scripture and reading all of that is shaping me into something. And, some of that's for academics, some of that is curiosity, but the large part of why I pray and read scripture and other things every day is I'm trying to shape myself into something, train my body, try to develop an ability, I would say, to listen for those opportunities to give, for those opportunities to serve, and to use statement that he uses toward the end of the giving chapter, to use one of Paul's quotes, we give, we serve and give to one another so that we may become more like the one who gives everything to us. That's a paraphrase. And out of that, and kind of take this to move on to one of the other crucial pieces of this chapter, and perhaps the one that may stir us up a little bit more, is the fact that he makes the comment that it is out of our brokenness that we truly learn to give. going to say that's the only thing that causes us to give, but he says the root of our giving nature is out of our brokenness. And to go even further with that, he talks about, not in the given chapter, but in the next chapter, he talks about the greatest gift we can give, that is also the greatest brokenness we can receive, and that is in our death. He talks about our death as being a gift. Now that goes totally against everything that I usually hear culturally, the cultural messages about death. Just I want your reactions to that. When you read that chapter or that segment where he talks about death as a gift, what did you think about that? What was your reaction to that? Good, bad, different?
I struggle.
Read it. Go ahead, Betsy.
I struggle with that concept, and I'm still sitting here thinking about it. I'm not sure I get it.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the death. I'm sorry, Betsy. Go ahead.
No, that's all. I'm done.
When my mother was ready to die, and she kept saying, "It's taking too long." My father, on the other hand, was not physically ready to die. And one night he just left, just like that. And it was a real gift, because the remainder of his life would not have been of any high quality. He just made a transition that sort of destroyed most of his independence. And he didn't use up all his money. So he left us something material, and we didn't have to watch him get pissed off. So I think a lot depends on the kind of death, and those two were gifts, I think, not just to the individuals involved, but to the rest of us who witnessed it. However, that's very different from losing a child or a long and painful illness,
I think I agree. It can be situational. I was observing Mary Lockhart, who died last week. It hasn't been very long, but I knew that she was very close to her daughters and her son-in-laws and all that. But there were so many, when they were all gathering for, I call it the vigil, and that's where the family comes together as the person's dying. And that is about the most wonderful gift I think you can give that person who's dying, is to be surrounded by their loved ones and to be permitted or be in a situation where they can die at home. And it really brings the family together. When my mother died about 8 years ago, it was a very powerful uniting force for all my family. And we're kind of a big, involved family anyway, but I think it indicated to us that we really wanted to care for each other in the future. And we were committed to sort of parenting each other as much as we could. And we're still doing that to a large degree. I think when someone is sick or ill or needs something, we all kind of feel perhaps our mother's or father's force, bringing us together to act again as a family. And in that regard, I would say my mother's death was a gift to us. And I kind of feel with Mary Lockhart and observing the way our house is, those of you who have seen it, we've got this big, massive front window, which has blinds in it. And then there's Mary's house right across the way. Literally, it's like very hard to miss a single thing going on. But all of her children, their friends, the people coming and going, it was very evident that there was just a bringing them all together. It was just a very emotional experience to watch them, but it reminded me a great deal of our situation when my mother died. So anyway, in that regard, I think you can be a gift. The death can be a gift.
Yeah.
And as Christians, Lord knows, you know, the major death on the cross is pretty much the focus of what we do. So I think death becomes very important in that regard. That's just my thought about it.
That's really nice, Deb. Thank you, because I had struggled, like Betsy, I had struggled with how can there be a gift in this? And you've helped me see that there can be a gift in death.
Well, I tell people that are going through the agony of their parents' demise, their last days, or the thing about this, and tell them, appreciate these days, the most important time you'll ever have with your parent and your brothers and sisters and your friends and your family. And that's, I think that's very true. Not necessarily perfect for everybody, because I know a lot of times families get acrimonious, but you know, it's just very powerful instance. But anyway, that's my thought about it.
Very good. Thank you, Deb. Anybody else?
I understand what.
In a sense, I can see, oh, go ahead, Betsy, sorry.
I was going to say, I can understand what Deb's saying, and maybe I was overthinking it. I don't know. I felt like there was something else he was trying to say that I was missing or just didn't get. I understand that a person's death can be a gift. Just being there with them. But I felt like there was something else there that I'd missed or didn't get. That's all.
I can see how the process of dying can be a gift. But Nouwen says, now after their deaths, blah, 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 now they can send us their spirits and we can live in a new communion with them. And I wasn't really sure what to do with that.
Well, that part resonated with me. And my take on that was, you grieve at their loss, but then you have wonderful memories and pictures that you can be comforted by. And so to me, that's the happiness that it can bring. You can look back on that and reflect, and it can bring you some resolution.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had some difficult times with my parents, and in going through their papers and photographs and just thinking about things at a distance, I understand them better. I understand why they did some of the things they did that ought not to be done. And it helps me take some of the skeletons out of my closet. And I have more skeletons than I have closet space, so.
Sorry, I just
I'm kidding. You think I'm kidding?
You know, I think most of you know this, but it's worth repeating because, you know, when we do a burial liturgy in the Episcopal Church, it is an Easter liturgy. It is a reminder that it is a resurrection. And whenever I gather family together before service, I remind them that this is a time mournful and sorrowful, but the service is a celebration. And it's one of the many things, perhaps one of the top things about the Episcopal Church that just is one of the things I always am proud of about us is that, you know, I've been to funerals where it's wailing and moaning and lamenting, and some of that's very justified. In our tradition, the focus is on the fact that God has already done something new and wonderful with this person who has died. And it is a celebration. And that is a message that often runs contrary to culture. And I'm so appreciative of all of your reflections on this, because I think we all kind of come at it from a different place. A lot of it depends on our experiences. Obviously, as a priest, death is something that I see regularly. Deb, you're talking about Mary. I was there probably 30 minutes before she died last week, and was there with the families. They were all gathered together. I have also experienced things, when we talk about deaths that are peaceful, or things that, what's that time? Maybe it wasn't the time, maybe it takes too long, as you talked about with your mother, Victoria. Then there's these other things that happen. For me, father's suicide, a friend of mine who was killed when he was 21 in a drunk driving accident, not hit by a drunk driver. That was all within a month of each other, those two things. I was a fire department chaplain, watching somebody burn in front of me in a car, and I couldn't do a thing to help them. When I was a hospital chaplain in Eggleston Children's in Atlanta, having to baptize post-mortem a baby who had been shaken so hard. I'd never experienced anything like that. So I asked that question, same question about finding the gift of death in that frame, about it. There's the quote meaningful deaths, and I'm well aware that those are titles we attribute to them. Then those that just don't make any sense whatsoever. Watching things like George Floyd that happened a couple of days ago up in Minneapolis. People who, in a country that has wealth of resources, that there are people who are starving. And I know, because I, especially when I was in Mobile, saw them on a regular basis coming in asking for help. These were legitimate people with legitimate needs, and not just folks working the system, so to speak. Those kind of things. And when Deb, you brought up about the great death, the death of Jesus on the cross, the gift of death was one. He died a very inglorious, brutal, and unheroic death. The cross was for a criminal. It was for somebody who was lower than dirt. Someone who was not even a citizen of Rome. It was for somebody who literally was, if Joseph of Arimathea hadn't come and taken the body off the cross, his body would have been thrown away like trash in a rubbish heap. And Nouwen obviously is very well aware of that when he makes that expression, the gift of death. But it associates it very closely with the brokenness of death. And I think where all this ties back together in this chapter, at least as far as I read it, is the fact that sometimes, joked about the talents earlier and feeling, I don't measure up to all these people or these amazing talents that I don't, knowing that I do have talents, just they're not the talents that I want to have sometimes. But that I also get this experience where I feel like I'm just not good enough, and I'm not worthy enough. And back to what we were talking about, feeling that, I'm anything but the beloved, that all of my mistakes have caught up to me. I'm one of these people too, Victoria. I'm in the skeletons in the closet club as well. I always joke with people, I wasn't always a priest. Had a few things in my past that I'm not proud of. And I'm not kidding when I say that. And there are those moments where I feel that those moments are the moments where Jesus offered his life for me. And I know when we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, a couple of people were uncomfortable with the idea that Jesus didn't die for all of us. Jesus sometimes died for me and for my failings, for my sins, my shortcomings. And I think where, to me, giving ties together, it's the gift of his life, death, and resurrection was for all of us, for me in particular, it was to remind me that in my brokenness and my feeling that I am totally powerless to help other people, it is through the power of God's love and the gift of life that I'm given that sometimes just my presence alone can offer someone a gift that I can't even begin to imagine that I'm capable of offering that gift to someone. And that the broken part we talked about last time, staring into the reality of that brokenness is very hard. And yet, I think one of the things we are called to do as the church is both to stare at our own individual brokenness, but to stare at the brokenness of the culture around us. Victoria, you alluded to that earlier with just, how we treat our water and our land, how we talk about racism, prejudice, all of those things that infect our culture, how we as human beings can all tend to be of the mindset that our life is solely to be lived for our own needs and own desires. And we certainly, I don't think any of us sitting here operate by that premise, but we're certainly surrounded by it in the culture. And we certainly probably live that way, not necessarily out of choice, but out of just we're swimming with the current sometimes because that's all that we can do. And so when he goes into his closing chapter, which is sort of the wrap-up chapter where he talks about how do we truly live this life, living as the beloved. He starts that very first paragraph in that chapter. He says, "As those who were chosen, blessed, broken, and given, we are called to live our lives with a deep inner joy and peace." But then the next paragraph, but what of the other side of it all? What of our desire to build a career, our hope for success and fame, and our dream of making a name for ourselves? Is that to be despised? Are these aspirations in opposition to the spiritual life? And he goes on to talk about that, but what is your answer to that question, to those questions? What about these desires for career, for success, fame, dream for ourselves?
And the Buddhists have a concept of right livelihood, which I came to understand fairly deeply when I first moved to Oak Ridge and had a job that was a terrible fit. And I thought the company was unethical. I thought they were Beltway bandits. It was a really bad fit. And I was extremely uncomfortable in just about any way you could imagine. And once I left that job, I was unemployed for a while, and I had just bought the house and I was in financial straits. But it was worth it because the job, the premises underlying the job went against everything I believe in. So a lot depends on how you define success. And actually, it was a very good career move for me, I guess. I mean, on paper, it was just a bad fit. And I've had other jobs like that. They haven't been quite as and it boils down to the same characteristics, and I just don't fit into that environment. And yeah, they pay more, and yeah, there's profit sharing at the end of the year, but it's just not worth it.
Yeah, I hear you. That happened to me a long time ago. And just to walk away from it, to say, I can't stand this anymore, I've got to get out of it, and be unemployed for a while. And then my whole career changed. And I think, thinking about it, you can develop that talent I guess I'm not quite sure how to explain it. I feel like I'm a little bit tongue-tied. Like maybe I'm not sure I can be coherent about this. You can have a career, but it doesn't have to consume you.
Yeah.
And you, like you said, maybe you don't make the most money you can. You have to find a balance because money's not everything. Money doesn't make you happy. I think you've got to learn that, and
You have to the balance.
Priorities correctly.
The balance is important. I had a lot of trouble with jobs that interfered with my rehearsal time because that was important to me.
So you have to make decisions that are comfortable for you and you can live with, even if they go against the grain of society. I think you have to have the chutzpah, or whatever you want to call it, the confidence in yourself, the self-esteem to do that.
And there's a phrase Nouwen uses in the end of this chapter and into, or the given chapter and into this epilogue chapter, talks about he knows no one who has truly found joy and happiness in having things, rather in giving things. In giving, and I would agree with that, with the caveats we've talked about earlier. How else would y'all, anybody else, how would y'all answer that question? What of our desire to build a career, hope for success and fame, dream of making a name for ourselves, these aspirations to the spiritual life?
About my feeling as someone who's had a career, and then I left that career prematurely due to disability, but I still benefited a great deal from that career. But I really feel if I'm indebted to anything, it's that having gotten a chronic illness, it really made me turn around and realize what was really most important to me, and to taking care of myself and nurturing myself and so forth. I'm very pleased that I was able to do things, sometimes in spite of all the stuff I was dealing with. I'm looking at Mary, and we both worked out the plants. And no place I don't think is more bizarre than working out the plants like we did in the decades ago. But I've never had an experience, good or bad, that wasn't useful in some respect. You know, it's never wasted. And I like that with Nouwen, where he and his friend experience, or he wants to experience things with his friend in the totality of it, and not just, you know, this and that it is appropriate or this and that is good. But for instance, I worked as a temp worker in Atlanta back in the early 80s, and I really had some terrible assignments and messed things up, and worked in some, you know, like you were talking about, where it was just the worst environment, you know, where it was really evident that some guy was sleeping with everybody in the room, and and that's why nobody, anyway, I'm just saying it can be pretty bad. And anyway, this but when I became later, I was a supervisor out at the plants, and I would interview or hire or train people who were temporary workers. I kind of understood how to involve them or pull them into the, you know, into what I needed them to do, into the situation. And I worked very well with them, I think, because I'd had that experience as a temporary. And anyway, I'm sorry. I'm still like not in my coherent phase. I
apologize. It's good.
But I'm just saying, I don't think it's ever wasted, even a bad experience, even a bad job, even a bad career. You know, you learn what you really don't want to do based on that. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, even a bad experience is good for something.
Yeah, it's good for something. And that's what I try to encourage younger people with that are really having a bad time or get fired or something. And I said, that might be the best thing ever happened to you. Truly. You don't have to go to that job anymore. You know, you can go out and do one or that you really like. So, but anyway.
Those bad experiences and linking back to the chapter before about being broken, the things that happen to you in your life that are unpleasant and you don't expect, perhaps, it helps you, it gives you a basis later to help give, be present for someone that's going through that same experience. Well, they're not exactly the same, but you've experienced, the event has happened to you, being fired or losing a child or having, whatever the experience is, you don't really know how it felt to you unless you've been through it. And so it's hard to even plug into somebody that's going through that experience if you haven't had it. You've got no basis for trying to connect with them, or less of a basis to try to connect with them because you've never been there. But if you have been, that being present for somebody that's in that same experience can be a gift.
That's like you can never be an effective leader until you've learned how to be a follower. You know, I've heard that phrase before many times, but it's like unless you really, have all the related experiences, that goes with dealing with a good boss or a bad boss or an effective leader or a non-effective leader, you don't really have a feeling for what an effective leader is like. So anyway, that's my feeling about it.
Now, and just kind of go back into that chapter, he makes the point of saying that he's back talking to his friend Fred and said, Fred, you were not called to serve in a monastery or in L'Arche, the community for the disabled, which Nouwen was called to serve. You were called to live your life, to be in a place where you had stimulation, excitement, movement, and a lot to see, hear, taste, and enjoy. The world is evil only when you become its slave. That's what Nouwen goes on to say. The world has a lot to offer as long as you don't feel bound to obey it. He goes on to say, the great struggle facing you is not to leave the world, to reject your ambitions and aspirations, or to despise money, prestige, or success, but to claim your spiritual truth, to live in the world as someone who doesn't belong to it. To me, it's always important to hear. It's always important that I share this with people because I can't tell you how many times I've seen people come into church or change career, or people try to go into a monastery, or they try to go on mission trips or become missionaries, all to try to get closer to God. Sometimes that's legitimate, but oftentimes it's out of our brokenness and failures, out of things that, being in jobs that we can't stand, or being in relationships that have fallen apart, or whatever it is that has broken in our life. It's a desire to run away from those things. And truth be told, the church, I speak for the churches, the church is a place where still got the same broken people. Still are going to bring the same old things in there, but what we do in the church is precisely what this whole book has been about, to proclaim that we are all the beloved, that God's gift to us is something which is given to us even in our worst moments. And as we say that, we remind ourselves, and as I said, I remind myself of this, that we are still called to live in the world. And I love that Nouwen says the world has a lot to offer. Growing up in the traditions, says the world is evil, you need to stay away from it. And nobody ever gave me an adequate explanation of how you stay away from the world. I really never have figured out that that type of theology that says you just stay away from that evil world and not do, can't dance, can't drink, can't all the can'ts, can't do. We cannot escape from the world, and the world does have a lot to offer, but it is also about realizing that the world is not supposed to tell us who we are, what our worth is, tell us what we are called to do. That is where we discover our truth is in the body of the faithful and in our prayers to God that reminds us of who we truly are. And to me, hearing that is always so reassuring to me. It's always something that'll preach, as we say, my colleagues say, it's always something that I can share with somebody as applicable anytime, any place, that we are here simply to give ourselves in the midst of our brokenness, to live with each other in our imperfections, and to realize it is out of those imperfections is how we live together and glorify God and dwell in God's love with all of our might and with all of our soul. I mean, there's more in that chapter, but that really, that paragraph there really kind of sums everything up for me. And so as we come near to our last few minutes together, just want to ask, and I want to say just an extra minute or two beyond 7:30 for an administrative thing. Any final thoughts or reflections, not just about the topic, but about the book in general, as this is our last one of this series as we come to a close? Any final thoughts from anyone that you'd like to share?
Real briefly, I read this book because I read a book before it that I started on this, which was called the Enneagram for Spiritual Growth. And one of the people that the book talked about was Henri Nouwen. And the sort of, it really focused on him as somebody that went through all these transitions. And I thought, gosh, what an interesting man to have made all these big changes like he did, and then to come and become a great spiritual writer. I've never read anything that he actually wrote until this book, but having the two books juxtaposed, I thought was absolutely fabulous, and I really enjoyed it. My favorite chapter was Broken. I'm sorry I missed the discussion on that. I thought that was just really fantastic. And I've always felt, since I'm in the choir, I missed so much not being able to come to some of the adult classes that are being held. It's just the choir, uber alles, or at least it was, it was the main time consumer of us. And but I really, really enjoyed this first book by Henri Nouwen. So I just thought I'd say that.
I'm glad you joined us for this one.
I was reading it along with Bonhoeffer's Life Together. And it's been very interesting because they say many of the same things in extremely different ways. So after struggling through Bonhoeffer and, showing my teeth and my temper, this is a much more relaxing read. And yet it comes down in pretty much the same place, and it covers pretty much the same material. So it
was the first time I'd read anything by Nouwen, although I had wanted to, and I enjoyed the book. I was reading the Bonhoeffer book at the same time as like Victoria, and this was much more pleasant than reading Bonhoeffer.
Bonhoeffer does not sugarcoat things, nor should he, with the context he wrote. But yeah, he's a little tougher read.
Yeah. He's a man of his time and place.
Yeah.
And that's as ugly as I'll get about him.
Yeah, their final thoughts. But real quick, before we call it a night, I have enjoyed this with y'all. I am so appreciative. A number of y'all have been here every week with us. Elizabeth was planning on being here this week, but she was back in the office really for the first full day today, and she was there about still there at 5 o'clock when I left. She said, I may or may not see you tonight. But this group that stayed, all of y'all that have stayed with us, those of you who have come and gone, those of you who've been here for one time, those of you who have watched this on YouTube, all of you, I'm deeply appreciative that have been a part of this. I would like to do something like this again. I would ask that you give me a break. I was telling the folks who were on before we started, give me a few weeks. We move into our new house middle of June, and so we'll be a little busy. A few extra tasks coming up, but I would like to know from y'all, this is all of you on Zoom and all of you who are watching this on YouTube, if you have anything that you would like to do for the next one of these. Because I imagine our next study will be similar format to this, is Zoom study with it recorded so others can watch it on YouTube. So I'm really open to anything. I don't have any ideas at the moment. I really kind of want to get some suggestions from you. And hopefully I'll get a number that will make it really hard for me to pick something. So don't need to answer that now, but that's your homework. So to assure that we meet again here on the Zoom space for this discussion, feel free to email me, call me, text me if you have some suggestions for what you might want. I do wish to continue this again after we take a little break.
Thank you for taking the time to do this in your busy schedule.
Oh, it's this is fun. I love doing this stuff. I always try to make time for it, and it's more rewarding to me in this format because of the comments that I hear from all of you, because it helps me immensely, probably more than what my comments help you. So let's keep it going. Just give me some thoughts about what you would like to do, and then we'll figure out a time to start another one, and we'll look forward to it when that is.
Sounds like a good plan.
Thank you.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Yep.
All right.
Good luck
All
with the move.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Good luck
Good
with
night,
the-
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Nice to see everyone. Everyone take care.
You too.